Thank you. Thank you. Well, greetings. I'm really glad to be here, and I was sorry to see some of those kids leave. I'd like to have them come back and see Ernie here, but maybe they will as we present, as we go on with our presentation. This guy, well, first, I want to just say that being a veterinarian is a lot of fun, and it's a wonderful life's occupation. You get to be with a lot of different animals, and and you can do it your whole life. And one of the neatest animals that I've ever worked with is the American buffalo, and I like the name buffalo. Bison is scientific, but buffalo, that just has a feel for what the animal really is. And the other thing that as a veterinarian that I get to do is work with the tribes right now, because they're reestablishing herds across North America, both Canada and the US. And they're so proud of what they're doing, and it's really fun to be a small part of that. But it's an important part, because we need to make sure that these animals are healthy, and that there's concerns about, especially in the United States, sometimes people get a little worried about, what bison and cattle together, but actually there's a lot of things that makes this a positive for our communities, and we're learning a lot about this animal. They're not cows, which is fine. They have their own disposition. You don't tell a buffalo what to do. You can get a buffalo to do whatever they want to do. And that means you let them do something. So you've got to approach the whole thing just a little different when you work with buffalo. But that's not new either, because a smart woman's been treating her man that way for hundreds or thousands of years. It's a lot easier to get the old man to do something if he thinks it's his idea. And that's the same for buffalo. We let them do things, and we set up the process so they can win. Ernie here was my buffalo. He was a live buffalo when I had him. He was an orphan, and he was an orphan along with another buffalo about his same age. They grew up in a sanctuary. They grew up away from a herd. To buffalo, culture is everything. And so these two guys, they had each other, but they didn't have a herd. And then the sanctuary went kind of belly up, and we needed to find a new home for Ernie. Well, I had him on my property for a couple of years, and it was fun. But I didn't pet him. Buffalo, even if they're raised as pets, can be extremely dangerous. And they play a little rough. So they're not, this guy will let you do a selfie and that type of thing. Oh, sorry. I've got to remember to hold this closer to my face. The idea of putting a skeleton on a buffalo like this wasn't my idea either. I saw it in a museum. They did it with a dinosaur. So I'm going to turn this buffalo just a quarter of a turn, I think. Can everybody still kind of see? I just wanted you to be able to see that on the backside, we have pretty much a real buffalo. And he even lets you stand here beside him and take a selfie if you want. But I wouldn't recommend that with a big buffalo, a live buffalo. They're kind of camera shy. Besides that, yeah, thank you. And well,
need to turn around for the camera, for the kids.
Oh, okay. We'll turn it clear around, show you what it's like. We're going to end up with the skeleton showing again, because that's kind of what I want to talk about. But first off, I want to show you the animal. Here's one of the reasons that we made this animal was to help hunters make a proper shot when this animal when a buffalo is put down. I mean, it's not hard to hit. There's a lot of surface area there. It's like shooting a car. But to do it right, you need to understand the anatomy of the buffalo. And in order, I prefer, to be honest with you, to shoot the animal in a nervous area where they go immediately to sleep. If you're not so sure where you're going to shoot, you can shoot in the heart and lungs. But I don't like that. So when a hunter shoots a buffalo, and if you're a good enough shot, you come down about an inch from the bottom of their horn, and you go back about 6 inches, and you put it just behind their ear. But you can't see their ear. I'm holding on to the ear right now, but buffalo's ear is not as visible as a cow's ear. But they work every bit as good. Buffalo have very good hearing, decent eyesight, extremely good smelling, and they're smart. They're smart animals. And they're quick, and these old guys can be really grumpy. So I think we're getting some feedback onto my other mic. I'll hold it here. Anyway, what other things we could do if we're a hunter and we're maybe further away is look at the leg. And when the leg, we come up and then we put the target right behind the leg. And so that helps us when we're educating hunters to do a decent, humane hunt and keeps. I don't want these animals to suffer, but they're a very useful animal. They have their meat is excellent. It's very rich, but it's not. Well, I think it's actually the best meat there is. But I'm kind of well, beef's darn good too. So I don't really want to get into that. But I did want to show this, and now we're going to turn him around and we'll look at the skeleton. Okay. We'll go back to where I said if you wanted the best shot for a buffalo that immediately puts the animal to sleep is to come down an inch from the horn and go back about 6 inches. And if you put the shot right, you hit them right in the first vertebrae. And that's called the atlas vertebrae. And the reason they call it the atlas, does anybody know? Why do you call it the atlas? Well, Atlas was the guy that held up the world, and so that vertebrae there is right at the base of the skull. It's also called the yes bone, and the reason it's called the yes bone is that it allows you to move your head up and down in a yes formation. Right behind that vertebrae is called the axis, A-X-I-S, something like that. Axis vertebrae, and that one allows the animal or us to turn our head from side to side, which is the no bone. So we've got the yes bone and the no bone, and then we've got more vertebrae that come up until we start running into ribs. There's actually 7 vertebrae in the neck of a buffalo. Anybody tell me how many vertebrae are in the neck of a giraffe? Anybody want to give me a guess? What? Say again? Same. He said just as many, and he's right. In mammals, these are mammals like we are, and they have 7 vertebrae. We have 7 vertebrae in our neck. Giraffes have 7 vertebrae in their neck. Now, if they're a dinosaur, that's a totally different thing because they're not really a mammal. They're an extinct animal with all of their own. And the other shot that I was talking about was in the heart and lungs. So you come up the leg, and the heart and lung area, the vital structure, are right here. That's a bigger target if you're further away, but it's a good target. I don't like it if I don't have to do it, because for two reasons. It wastes meat, and the other reason is the potential for pain for a little bit. How's it? Sorry, folks. And if I look at the chest of a buffalo compared to a cow, now they're not the same. They look the same, and they have a lot of similar physiology, but the buffalo has a tremendously large chest cavity and heart, and they have a capacity closer to a horse. They can run, and they for a long time they have great endurance. They have 14 vertebrae, 14 ribs, and whereas a cow has 13. That's not a big deal, but their chest is much bigger. And I'm just trying to keep it from ringing back. But I learned a lot of things by studying the anatomy, the skeletal anatomy of a buffalo. And these animals, we can even compare their skeleton to our skeleton. Our skeleton has many similarities. And I have an outline on that I want to supply everybody with later. Another big thing that we notice about buffalo and their skeleton are these long, all of these. And that's a special adaptation on this animal that is very pronounced. However, every animal that walks on four legs has a little more height to those, what are called dorsal spinous processes of the vertebrae. Yeah. And in a buffalo, there's a lot of muscles connected to this. I have a question. Go ahead.
Mrs. Reynolds' class. How much does a buffalo weigh?
Okay, the question is, how much does a buffalo weigh? Well, it depends on whether it's a male or a female, and whether it was just born or it's fully grown. If it's just born, they weigh around 50 pounds, which is kind of nice. They're not very heavy when they're born, and they give birth rather easily. If it's a male and it's an adult, they can weigh up to a ton, 2,000 pounds. 1,850 is more likely, 1,850 pounds. I've seen them heavier than a ton, but that's uncommon. Now, and if it's a female, they weigh around 1,150 to 1,200 pounds. I have another question.
How many total bones does a buffalo have?
How many total bones? Oh boy. You got me. 200 and probably, that can vary a little bit, around the 210 mark on total bones. And it depends, like I was saying, there's 14 ribs on each side of a buffalo. That's 28 ribs altogether. And that chest cavity is huge. If you compare that to a cow, it's much smaller. It's much more like a horse, as I mentioned earlier. And so I'm just going to go down. I'm just going to go down the skeleton and talk a little about the back part of the buffalo. And buffalo look kind of imbalanced because there's so much weight up front, But once you start looking at them and you see how they move, they're in perfect balance. And about 65% of their body weight is on their front feet, maybe 70%, which is not uncommon for four-legged animals to have more weight on their front legs than their back. But buffalo are much more this way than most other animals. And another thing about the legs on a buffalo, and any other animal for that matter, like us or like a cow, the front legs are not attached directly to the skeleton. They're kind of in a sling underneath the body. The back legs are attached directly to the skeleton at the hip joint. And that goes for us too. What that means is the back legs are for propelling the animal forward and moving. The front legs are for support, more for support. Because when the animal runs, they push with their back legs. So they're kind of like a two-wheel drive car. They push with their back legs and they support with the front legs. Another thing that is quite emphasized in a buffalo is the size of their hoofs. The front hoofs are bigger than the back. Another question.
This is from Mrs. Margaret's 3 class. Is the horn a bone?
Is the horn a bone? That's a good question. The horns, as opposed to antlers, they're different structures. Antlers shed and then they come back, they grow back. Horns don't shed. They have a core of bone and they have an outside structure that's kind of like the same stuff that your fingernails are made of, or your hooves if you're a horse or a cow or a buffalo. And so there is a bony center to the horn core, but we have a horn that is made out of keratin, it's called, and it never sheds.
How long does an average buffalo live?
How long does an average buffalo live? They're a very long-lived animal, and they're slow maturing. Like when you have beef calves, they usually have their first baby when they're 2-year-olds. Buffalo generally don't have the first calf until they're 3. So they're slower maturing, but they're longer lived. I've heard of right into 30 years as maximum, and it depends on their environment. If they're in a tough environment, in the mid-20s is probably the average for a lifespan for a buffalo.
You want another question?
I'll take another question.
How strong is their jaw?
How strong is their jaw? How strong is a buffalo's jaw? Well, they're kind of neat. I'm going to go over here. They look a lot like a cow. The buffalo's dentition, the teeth of a buffalo, and the teeth of a cow are a lot alike. They have lower teeth, and they do not have upper teeth. They have what's called a dental pad, and they use a combination of a dental pad and their tongue and those lower teeth to graze. And they also have a sense of what this stuff tastes like when they graze it. And all of that plays into how they interact with their environment, with the prairie. I think if you really think of a buffalo, you got to think of the whole digestive system. The whole animal is really a part of the prairie. Even the digestive system, because they take in grass, they chew it up, they swallow it, it goes down into a big compartment, almost as big as a big oil drum, and that's located kind of right in this area. It's called the rumen, and it's a fermentation vat, this stuff that they take in, this grass mostly, they'll lay down and they'll burp it back up, and that's called rumination. And the cattle people know about that, and that's really a neat what happens there is really neat, because if we tried to survive on grass, we couldn't do it. And neither could the buffalo. If the buffalo didn't have the rumen and the ability to burp that back up and rechew it, combine it with saliva, and just like the cows do, those are really important. If it didn't have that, it could starve. But what happens is these little microorganisms that live in that digestive tract, they actually digest the grass, and then the buffalo digests the microorganisms. And then it comes out as buffalo poop, and that's very important stuff. And it's part of the prairie ecosystem. And it's very like a ruminant animal, like our cows and our buffalo. They're very important to our grasslands. And the grasslands aren't complete without them. Okay?
How many calves would an average buffalo have in a year or in a lifetime? How many calves?
Okay, that all depends on how many calves would a buffalo have in a lifetime. Well, that depends on how long she lives. She probably started 3 years old. I've seen a few buffalo calve at 2s. That's uncommon. Maybe if they're born in the early spring and they're pretty old during the first breeding season, they might become pregnant. Generally, they stay open. They do not become pregnant until they can calve as 2-year-olds. So these buffalo generally have a very good reproductive rate. And say a 25-year-old buffalo could have 20 calves in her lifetime. And I was watching the movie, and they still playing it. I was watching these little calves. Mother buffalo are very doting mothers, and they're very good mothers. And you watch these little calves, the calves stay right by their mothers. That's for protection against predators, because these animals are basically wild animals. And they still are wild. They're adaptable and they work. We can have a buffalo industry, or bison industry. We can treat them sort of like cattle, but we've got to treat them a little different too. And that means we got to understand what their culture and all is like. And that's the fun part of owning them. One last question.
How many teeth do a buffalo have?
How many teeth?
Teeth.
Wow. That's a good question. They have their incisor teeth along the lower part of their jaw. There's 4 on each side, that makes 8. Then they have their kind of a fang, similar to, but it's modified because they're a grass-eating animal. And that comes next, 1 on each side on the bottom. And then on top, instead of teeth, they have what's called a dental pad, which is another animal that eats grass that has teeth on top and teeth on the bottom is a horse. They're a little different, and in my opinion, they're a little harder on the ground than cows or buffalo.
Last question, then we gotta wrap it up.
Okay.
So in my anatomy class, we learned about kidneys and stuff. Are bison kidneys more like cattle? And if so, is there any differences? Or are they more like a pig's kidney, the shape?
The kidney shape. Okay, the question is a bison kidney. In cattle, kidneys are lobulated. In bison, they are too. They are also. Bison and cattle are related, but it's way back. I mean, they still can interbreed. they don't do well interbreeding, and they don't do it without the help of man. But the kidneys are similar looking on the external surface, and they function similar to, to keep the body in balance with the various minerals that the body takes in. So, does that answer your question? Well, I think we're going to have to wrap this up pretty quick. Oh, and a few things I wanted to point out just real quick. I never saw this buffalo limp when I had him when he was an adult. But when we got him, when we cleaned the bones, we found an old fracture here on this. It's called the femur. It's a large bone of the leg. And there's many other little things I'd love to point out. We're going to have him here for the next several days, and I'm going to be here, and I really enjoy talking to people and answering questions. And so I thank you for being a good audience and listening to me.